Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Dispatches. I'm your host, Brady Kreitzer. Our guest today is Journal of the American Revolution contributor Drew Palmer, and he'll be discussing Francis Marion and one of his earliest exploits at Great Savannah. Drew, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Drew, you're a first time guest. Tell us a little bit about your background.
From the earliest I can remember, I've always had an interest in the Revolutionary War period, especially the war in the South. So as I got a bit older, I started kind of pursuing this interest in history, and not just the Revolutionary War era, but American history in general. So when I was in college, going through grad school, I got a really great opportunity to kind of bounce around at different public history sites and work as an interpreter and researcher. So relating to the Revolutionary War, I spent a summer working at Fort Ticonderoga in way upstate New York. I worked there doing interpretation and research, and that's kind of what really got me on this Revolutionary War kick, where I really started taking it seriously as like, this is my period. This is what I want to research. This is what I really want to pursue moving forward as a historian. So, worked there. I spent the next summer working for the National Park Service as a seasonal ranger at Adams National Historical Park in Quincy, Massachusetts. So, John Adams, founding father, I got a lot into his history. From there, I worked a temporary position at Fort McHenry National Monument and Historic Shrine in Baltimore. I was there planning a lot of the America at 250 interpretive goals exhibits. Since then, I've been teaching, U.S. high school history teacher at a private school outside of Baltimore. And I've been loving the classroom, loving the kids, and I've been doing that while still researching the Revolutionary War and pursuing that passion.
So, Drew, you write about Francis Marion. Hard to deny his impact on the war. You're going to talk about one of the early raids, ambushes in his career, and I think there's a lot of value to kind of parsing these out because a lot of these blend together for us. But what inspired you to take on this article to write this piece?
So, my interest in the Southern campaign, the Southern theater of the Revolutionary War, is more in these small partisan engagements. That's what really fascinates me. Guerrilla warfare, these hit and run ambushes, the role that loyalists in the South play in this as well. That's just what really fascinated me. So I was always interested in Francis Marion and that idea of irregular warfare, partisan warfare. So I started reading into Marion a little bit, and then it turned into deep research on Marion and his time. And that's when I discovered this story about this engagement known as Great Savannah. And what stuck out to me was it was his first real engagement, like real partisan, this like irregular warfare engagement. And that's what really put me on to the topic. And I started going deeper into the topic. So that's what got me interested in it.
Excellent. So, for those who aren't familiar, maybe we tend to view big, important people in the revolution maybe in a vacuum sometimes. Drew, can you tell us a little bit about what's going on in South Carolina in 1780? Take us into Marion's world a bit.
So leading up to August 1780, the Patriots had suffered a devastating defeat at the Battle of Camden, August 16th. Wasn't going well before that either. They suffer a huge defeat in a 6-month siege in Charleston. So for the Patriots in the South, they are losing this war in the South. It is really not going well. The British are starting to move further into South Carolina, into the backcountry away from Charleston, and beginning to further exert their authority, in their attempt to subdue South Carolina. So Francis Marion's world moving into August it would not have been a fun time to be a patriot in the South. The Southern Continental Army was completely destroyed after their loss at Charleston, um, and after Camden as well. So there is no Southern Continental Army moving into early August. So Marion, previously, he's a lieutenant colonel of the 2nd South Carolina Continental Regiment, still holds that rank, but there is no more 2nd South Carolina Regiment. So um, it would have been a grim period to be Francis Marion. It would have been a very unsure time what his experience was going to look like moving forward after defeat.
Yeah. One of the things that stood out about your article, which I would encourage everyone to read, www.allthingsliberty.com. You write in your article, Drew, that Marion ends up with two commissions at once. I mean, if there's anything that underscores the just, you know, the kind of confusion that reigns down there, I think that might be it. Could you kind of explain that dual commission, some of the problems with it, but also how he took advantage of it?
Yeah, so that's a great example too of just that unsure feeling that the Patriots have in general moving into August in 1780. So, like I mentioned, Marion, he's a lieutenant colonel in the Continental Army. And even after he loses his regiment after Charleston, he still maintains that commission. And we have to go back a little bit because it's one of these what if moments. So Marion actually gets permission to leave Charleston as the siege is taking place. He suffers an ankle injury. There's a whole bunch of stories that he's at a party and he jumps out of a second floor window and he hurts his ankle and he gets permission to leave Charleston to nurse the injury and return to help. So he leaves Charleston, and once the chaos picks up, he is going around, moving into North Carolina, looking for a newly formed Continental Army, even before the Battle of Camden. And once Camden occurs, he's really looking for, where am I going to go next? Right up before we get to Camden. He is like I said, a Continental officer with no Continental troops in after August 16th, after Camden in 1780. When he meets the militia force, the militia, they're from Williamsburg, South Carolina. They actually vote Marion to lead their militia force. So he takes on command of this militia, even though he has no official orders or justification to do this. The men literally elect him to do this. So it's odd because he has no official control over these men. These men are their own commanders. They can come and go as they please, but they choose to serve under Marion. So it's an interesting dynamic. Marion doesn't become an official brigadier general of South Carolina militia until after this engagement at Great Savannah, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But when he actually gets true command of militia, that happens in the early fall of 1780.
So, Drew, in your article, we can look at military successes and these sort of frontier backcountry experiences. Skill goes a long way, but sometimes luck is also a big part of it. You say that Marion will encounter a deserter, and that kind of opens up a whole window of opportunity for him. Could you tell us that story and what that led to?
Yeah, so after the Battle of Camden, a yet another reformed Continental Army has now been destroyed. The hero of Saratoga, Horatio Gates, he comes south. He leads this army and he fights the British force at Camden. Marion is not there. He's actually given orders by Gates to take a small force of militia, and burn all of the boats that could be used by the British, which were along the Santee River, to prevent a British escape in the case of a British victory at Camden. Obviously, that doesn't happen. So Marion will still carry out his orders. He's like, "These are my orders. I'm gonna burn these boats along the Santee." And it's as he's doing that, he has a deserter that comes into his camp, a officer of loyalist militia, no less, that comes into his camp. He tells him two things. First thing he tells him is that his house has been burned by the British. So he finds out he's lost his plantation, and then he also finds out that there is a small British force not too far from his position, and they are escorting about 150 Continental soldiers of the 1st Maryland Brigade who were captured at the Battle of Camden. So I describe it in the article that it's a stroke of luck because you have this loyalist officer that just goes into the camp and he says, this body of American prisoners is being transported by British troops and they're only about 6 miles away from your position. So that's what this loyalist comes in and tells Marion, and from there he makes the decision to act on that.
So, Drew, I like talking to historians like you because you've worked at not just one historic site, but a whole myriad of sites covering all different kinds of history. You know this better than anyone. Being in a place, being there is important to really understanding it. So we can obviously go to Great Savannah on this interview, but maybe set it up a little bit for viewers and listeners. What is Great Savannah? What does it look like? Just kind of paint a picture for us.
Yeah, so Great Savannah was one of the plantations which belonged to Thomas Sumter. Thomas Sumter, he has his own story during the Revolutionary War. He will lead this sort of partisan war as well against the British in South Carolina. But the name of his plantation was the Great Savannah Plantation. It would have been swampy. The actual plantation house was up on a hill. And once the British come down to the Santee River, they're going to cross the river, and it's at this plantation that they will rest for the night. And people in the area knew of this plantation. Like it was one of those sites where you'd be like, well, I'm this far from the Great Savannah, so I kind of know where I'm going and where I'm at. It was a generally well-known plantation. Today, it's actually underwater, so it's not there anymore at all. And the actual location of this ambush is really not there technically anymore either. But at the time, Marion hears that this is where this British force is camped out for the night. They would have been, the vast majority of them were from the 63rd Regiment of Foot. There was also Loyalist provincials there as well. They were called the Prince of Wales Regiment. They were mainly recruited out of New York and Connecticut. And outside of them, there was a couple Loyalist militiamen along with them. But that's kind of what the scene is going to be. It's going to be nighttime. It's going to be your what you would imagine as your typical like nighttime ambush.
Yeah, we don't see many nighttime movements, militarily speaking, in the 18th century, just
Right.
because of the kind of inherent danger and uncertainty of it. But that didn't scare Marin at all. So maybe tell us, what were his goals? I mean, was he hoping to use the darkness to his advantage? Tell us what he hoped to achieve there.
Yeah, so he was absolutely using the darkness to his advantage. He very well understood the need for the element of surprise. He knew that he had less men. He knew that his men were not traditionally trained as soldiers in the way that these British soldiers were. So um, he knew the tactical importance of a nighttime attack. He would attack just in general. He would typically attack at night. Sometimes he would attack in the early dawn hours. So he was actually very particular and calculated in um, his decision to ambush this British force at Great Savannah.
Okay, well, Drew, we've set it up, I think, pretty adequately. Take us through the moment. Take us through the ambush at the Great Savannah.
Yeah, so this was an interesting ambush to research about and write about because there are very little primary source material of that go into detail of what actually happens at this ambush. There's um, a decent amount of secondary source material. In particular, one man named Mason Locke Weems. He is a author, writer, and he writes after the war about this engagement. And he has a source who fought alongside Marion. His name was Peter Horry. But Peter Horry was not at this ambush. He was not at Great Savannah. So the source that Weems gets is not was not actually present. So I had to go kind of here's what Cornwallis said about the engagement. Here's what Marion said about the engagement, and kind of piece it together based off of those exact primary sources to kind of tell the most accurate picture possible. So it's a very quick ambush. The British soldiers from the 63rd Regiment of Foot are completely caught off guard. So caught off guard that they have no time to really react. They're not near their accoutrements or their weapons when the ambush occurs. So how do you respond to an ambush if you don't have your weapons or the accoutrements you need to properly put up a fight? They did not have any of that. The main reason these British soldiers, like I said earlier, are even here in the first place is to transport these 150 American prisoners who are captured at Camden. And in Camden at the time, it's very crowded. Men are getting sick. It's August in South Carolina. So this march has not been exactly pleasant either. They're not really ready or in a condition to fight. The British in general also don't expect this type of resistance either. Cornwallis says clearly in his correspondence that he literally did not expect resistance. So these British soldiers, they're not expecting something like this. So Marion orders the ambush. They come out of the swamps, out of the trees, and it really is one of these scenarios where it's over before it ever began. Casualty wise, there are 2 British soldiers that are killed in the engagement, a couple more wounded. On the American side, there's 1 soldier killed and 1 with a head wound. So combat wise, like I said, it happens very quickly. It would have been very confusing. But I don't think I mentioned earlier that Marion's goal, I think I neglected to answer this, but Marion's goal was first goal was to capture or free these 150 American prisoners from the Maryland line. So once the British resistance is taken care of, very quickly, I might add, then Marion will immediately free these 150 Continental soldiers from Marion or from the British.
So, Drew, we look at an event like this, and it can feel small. It probably felt small at the time, but we have this big picture view looking back they didn't have. Connect some dots for us. Why is this particular ambush important? Is there a domino effect? Why are we still talking about it?
Yeah, so there's 2 things that I really think of importance wise. One with Francis Marion that I kind of met earlier is this is his first kind of real partisan guerrilla engagement. It sets the tone for what he's going to do later on. Like this ambush is kind of one of his textbook ambushes that we're going to see time and time again. He gets intelligence, he acts on that intelligence, usually with surprise attacks, like I said, at night or the early morning hours. So it sets the tone for what's going to come later. You know, his legend isn't formed at Great Savannah, but that legend is starting to be born based off what he does at Great Savannah. Um, Another thing that's kind of that I think is also important or interests me with my connection to the Revolutionary War in Maryland is these 150 Maryland Continentals who, once Marion frees them, they most do not cooperate. Marion frees them, and he's like, "This is great. I have 100, close to 150 soldiers that are going to now join my militia ranks," and most of them say, "No, we're done. Our war's over." That really interested me because the Maryland Continentals, these are they have a reputation as some of, if not the best soldiers in the Continental Army. Many of them are veterans. They re-enlist. They're commanded by veteran officers, but after the defeat at Camden, just how bad it was, um, many of them say, "What's the point? We're done fighting." They insisted on continuing to be prisoners, continuing on to Charleston, which is just um, shocking to me. And I think it illuminates that, you know, even the soldiers with the best reputation in war have have their limits when it comes to morale and what they do in war. And the fact that they were choosing likely a agonizing sentence on a British prison ship or something like that, I think illuminates what they were feeling and thinking at the time. So I think that kind of human aspect of being a soldier is important too. It shows what the Americans are going through at the time. It shows the state of morale with these continental forces and the American militia in the South as well. So those are the two things that kind of come to mind.
Drew, we always end this show with the same question. We've done it over 300 times since we started doing the program. The answers are always great. How do you think your article, this topic, helps us understand the Revolutionary Era better?
Um, I think the article illuminates um, what was illuminates what was done in the South by these American partisan forces to keep the Revolutionary War, keep the fight going in the South with the lack of a conventional continental force. Because, like I says, it does not exist at this point in mid-August of 1780. So men like Marion, excuse me, in these um, small militias really take up an important role in keeping the fight going with such low morale, again, with the lack of a conventional force. And once a conventional force does come back, though a lot of these men, not all of them get along, as we know, not all of them love to work together, but men like Marion will coordinate fairly closely with Nathaniel Greene and the Continental Army, and they will work together in a lot of cases to move through South Carolina and take back control from the British. So yeah, I think um, it shows, especially in the South, what is done to keep the war going, keep the British on their toes, um, while there's chaos going on to try and rebuild this Continental Army.
Drew Palmer, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, excellent, Drew.